playing the piano tonight. It's nice to have Amy filling in for Rachel. Of course, Amy plays with Rachel Sunday mornings, and it's good to have two piano players in the church. And occasionally we have that one exception where both our piano players are gone, but it's nice to know that when one is there, the other one can fill in. So I appreciate that. So take your Bibles tonight and turn to the book of Joshua, chapter number 7. Joshua chapter number 7. I'll try to be short tonight as much as I can be. And I felt I went kind of long this morning. Start my timer here. All right, Joshua chapter number 7. We're not going to get through the whole chapter tonight. This is a really good chapter, and this is one of those chapters you could probably park in for a long time. We won't do that either, but we'll probably take a couple of weeks to get through this. But up to this point, the children of Israel, we know that they crossed over Jordan on dry ground into the Promised Land, and last week we talked about the great victory that they had in Jericho. A city that was shut up, a city that was closed off. One of those things that when they looked at it, they probably thought, how are we going to do this? But they were able to do it. They were able to have victory over that. We also learned before that not only was Joshua visited by the angel of the Lord, he was officially called by God. And after their victory in Jericho, his name was famed all through the land. You could say that things were going really well for Israel. I mean, this was a great time. If you were part of the children of Israel, this was one of those times. They're pretty much at their peak right now. Yep. After 40 years in the wilderness, they finally go to the land that's promised to them, and they're done with their baby bread. They're done with the manna. They're picking their own corn. They're winning their own battles, and the Lord's helping them. Everything is going really well. Now let's go ahead and start in verse number 1. And the first word is but. But the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing, for Achan, the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. Now the but in that first word, but, indicates that this story is headed in a certain direction, but something happens to change its course. You know, Cody, you're a really nice guy. I like you. You have a lot of good qualities. But no one likes to hear that but. You're really good at, you're so good at this one thing, but, we just really don't want you here. That's a horrible thing to hear. But is not the thing that you want to hear in the middle of a sentence. But what this is indicating is that they were heading in one direction, everything was well, but we hit a snag in the road. We have something happen. Now, I'm going to veer off course just for a couple minutes here. An example of something veering off course would be David and Bathsheba. Now, you guys know the story, and that was a time when kings went to battle. That was a time when they didn't need to stay home, and that's what David did. He stayed at home. And he spent one night with Bathsheba, and then in the very next verse says, and he found out that she was with child. So now he's got to cover his sin, because after all, he's the king of Israel. The king of Israel can't be known in some sort of a scandal. This is a big deal. So let's cover the sin. So he brings Uriah the Hittite, which is Bathsheba's husband, back from battle, and he tries to get Bathsheba and Uriah together to have some sort of accountability. And that doesn't work. He tries getting him drunk, and that doesn't work. Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11 real quick. 2 Samuel chapter number 11. And we'll start in verse number 22. 2 Samuel 11:22. I know that we're only in verse 1 of Joshua chapter 7, but I want everyone to understand this point and how important this is. Verse 22 says, So the messenger went and came and showed David all that Joab had sent him for. So what had happened up to this point is that since David could not get Uriah to stay a night with Bathsheba, he told Joab to go ahead and put Uriah in the hottest part of the battle, so that when the battle was going on, that Uriah would die. And that would cover up David's sin. That way he could marry Bathsheba and live happily ever after. in verse number, verse number 23. Verse number 23 says, And the messenger said unto David, Surely the men prevailed against us, and came out unto us into the field, and we were upon them even unto the entering of the gate. And the shooters shot from off the wall upon thy servants, and some of the king's servants be dead. And thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Then David said unto his messenger, Thus shalt thou say unto Joab, Let not this thing displease thee, for the sword devoureth one as well as another. Make thy battle more strong against the city, and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. And when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah her husband was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife, and bare him a son. Now that's not where the verse ends, is it?
No.
The verse ends right here. It says, But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. That's a but that you don't want to read about in this story. But this thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Now, David may have thought that he got away with it. He may have thought that, you know what? Look at this. I got away with this scot-free. Nobody found out about it. You know, we put Uriah in the hottest part of battle. He died. And now I married Bathsheba. She bore me a son. And all's well. But the thing displeased the Lord. And, you know, the application there is that just because you temporarily get away with something doesn't mean that you permanently get away with something. I mean, there's a lot of things that people think that they get away with. I mean, you know, you can watch datelines of people who get put in jail for murder, but there's 10 years where they're free. They don't have enough proof. The evidence isn't there yet, and all of a sudden there's a knock on that door. Mr. So-and-so, come with us. This is your local police department, you know, and that's it. That's the last ounce of freedom that they ever had. And the thing that David did had pleased the Lord. So things had seemed to work out. And just because things are going well in your life with hidden and covered sin, that might not be the Lord blessing you. That might be the Lord just giving you space to repent. Look, here's your time. You better take care of it. But that space is getting smaller and smaller. I mean, you know, Jesus says, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice, I will come unto him and sup with him, and he with me. But how long is he going to stand there and knock? How long are you going to ignore him? How long will you just say, no, not now, not now, not now? So, but this thing pleased the Lord. Now, turn a couple pages over. And look in chapter number 13. Now, the dust had kind of settled, and it was Nathan the prophet that went unto David and told him a parable, and David heard it and said, Oh, this is a horrible story. Surely this man must die. And Nathan the prophet said, David, thou art that man. I was talking about you in the parable. So David got right with God and got some things right. However, look in verse number 1 of chapter number 13. And it came to pass after this. After what? After David sinned. This is after the dust was settled. This was even after he got right with God. That Absalom, the son of David, had a fair sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. And Amnon was so vexed that he fell sick for his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin. And Amnon thought it hard for him to do anything to her. Verse number 3, But Amnon had a friend. There's that but. But Amnon had a friend. And again, this story is pointing in the direction that even though you have Amnon, who is the son of a king, you know, he might be sitting there thinking, hey, I might have these lustful thoughts over my sister, but I'm the son of a king. And I can't do anything to embarrass my father. I can't do anything to ruin the family name. So even though I have these fleshly lusts that I shouldn't have, I'm going to just pass on by and keep going. But, here it is, but Amnon had a friend. And it says, whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very subtle man. Now, you guys know the end of the story. And it's a horrible end of the story. And here you have an R-rated story right here in the Bible. 2 Samuel 13. It's no coincidence that it's chapter 13 as well. But Amnon had a friend. But this thing displeased the Lord. Look, you know, there's a lot of things that we can look back in our lives and say, man, it was going really good, and things were rolling, and I was serving God. Oh, but that one night that I messed up. But that one person I ran into, that one time. I mean, there's people there's people that are sitting in prison tonight over one bad night. I mean, they were good people, but maybe they got drunk one time. People that get into accidents, drinking and driving, aren't often alcoholics. Sometimes they're just wrong place, wrong time. I don't ever get drunk. I just was with the wrong crowd that night, got drunk, drove home, hit a guy, and now I sit in prison, or now I'm, on probation. All these things. But Amnon had a friend. He had a friend. And but that but indicates that nothing would have happened had it not been for his friend Jonadab. And the simple application, especially for you young people tonight, is you better be careful who your friends are. He had a friend who was a subtle friend, kind of like an Eddie Haskell type, and I probably just went way over all your kids' heads. The older people, I know who Eddie Haskell is. Leave It to Beaver. Some of you, who? Leave It to who? I've never heard of that before. I'm even dating myself. That's not even a show in my childhood, but
my childhood,
in his childhood, it was before Marilyn's time, but still, it was. Boy, we could all make jokes about our ages in here. But Amnon had a friend. He had a friend, and you better be careful who your friends are, because who your friends are might determine that but in your life. But so-and-so had a friend. He was doing really well. He was going off to Bible college. He was going to serve God, but he met the wrong person. He met the wrong girl. She met the wrong person. She married the wrong, but, all the buts. But this thing displeased the Lord. Now back to Joshua chapter 7. Joshua chapter 7, and in verse 1, but the children of Israel committed a trespass, and they were doing really well, and they were serving God, and they were in a victorious state. And somebody named Achan got in the way, and because of this one man's sin, the whole camp is punished. The whole camp of Israel over one man's sin. Ecclesiastes 9:18 says, "Wisdom is better than the weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good." But one sinner destroyeth much good. There's that'll preach right there. One sinner destroyeth much good. Now you say, well, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair that just because this one person, all of Israel gets punished. I mean, really, that's kind of you think about that and say, well, why would the rest of them get punished? Why would Joshua get punished? Why would this happen over? I mean, it wasn't them, it was him. The whole human race was punished over one man. Romans 5:12 says, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered the world, and by sin, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for all that have sinned." And you say, well, I still don't think it's fair. And sometimes it's not fair. Come on, Adam, you ruined it for everybody. I didn't eat of the tree. Sometimes it's hard to wrap your head around that. But did you know that by the righteousness of another man, you're going to heaven if you're saved? Maybe you think it's fair now. I don't know. Romans 5:19 says, "For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so by the obedience of one shall many be made righteous." But here we have this one man who brought destruction to the nation of Israel. And another application with this, too, when talking of Achan, is that he brought destruction to Israel, but this was destruction from within. This didn't come from the outside. This came from the inside. And you know that the biggest enemy that you have is yourself? I mean, the big, when you look across our biggest enemies and say, no, I don't really like that guy. Well, what about yourself? What about yourself? Theodore Roosevelt once said, if you could kick the person in the pants responsible for most of your trouble, you wouldn't sit for a month. That's really good, isn't it? Because the majority of problems that we have are really self-inflicted wounds or self-inflicted problems. We're not, you name the problem, and it's usually a priority problem. It's usually a priority problem in our life, one way or the other. If you don't eat right, it's because your priorities are messed up. I mean, that should be a priority. You name it, and the majority of problems are really self-inflicted there. Now you look at churches, and churches are harmed from where? The inside, not so much the outside. Look, how many churches closed down because of the government? I mean, I'm talking about America. I'm talking about American churches. How many American churches close down because the government closes them down? I can't think of. I mean, I'm sure there might be a few cases here and there. How many churches close down because bars make them close down? How many churches close down because you name it, filthy place forces them to close down? They don't. They close down because of the achings that are within. They close down because of the problems that are within. It's something that happens within the body that causes the body to hurt. It's not the things from the outside. I mean, when you read through the book of Revelation and you read through the 7 churches that are in Laodicea, and God gives them warnings saying, hey, you need to do this and watch out for this. Not one time do they talk about an enemy from the outside. It's all their problems within. I mean, think about that. Because our problems, and even our problems here, come from the inside, not the outside. For all the complaining that we can do about the exterior, it's the interior. And I'm not talking about the church itself, I'm talking about the body of believers. It's the interior that needs the most work. This is where we struggle. And if the church ever closes its doors, it's not going to be because of Mayor Wild. It's not going to be because of whoever's in office. It's going to be because of our own afflictions. It's going to be because of our own fault. And, for the people who've been here a long time, I mean, the stories that have happened. And the reason why people fight and why they get upset are so trivial. I mean, they're so stupid. I was talking to another pastor today, and I said, the thing that amazes me about church people is that the things that we can fight about and the things that we can butt heads about, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you almost have to give whatever devil caused it some little credit. Like, man, that's pretty creative. How did you get people to fight about that? I mean, people, they left over the wallpaper. Yeah, they did. Now, I know there's other stuff there. There's underlining things, and that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, as to say. But there are people that really get upset about the dumbest little things. And look, I know that we all have opinions, and we would all do things a little bit differently, or you might paint that, the shade a little bit. I wouldn't make it that dark blue, I'd make it a little bit lighter. Okay, fine, that's not a reason to quit church. That's not a reason to break fellowship over a color. But we see that. I mean, we literally see that. You see it, and I mean, if somebody donated $100 to the church and said, use this money to benefit the church, and JB said, you know what, I'm going to go put a new window in. Someone else would say, well, I think it's more important that we trim the trees. Well, who's right? Well, I mean, it's just a matter of opinion. It doesn't really matter, I mean, like, both need to be done, but when one person chooses the trimming and the other person, well, I said the window. And they both get mad, don't talk, and then, what happens? They both quit. That's usually how it goes. And that's not how it should go, but that's usually how it goes. What I'm saying is this. The enemy is ourselves, and it comes from within. And we got to be careful about that kind of stuff. And that's what happened with Achan, is that Achan's sin affected everybody there. And by the way, you know that the devil would want nothing more to see the doors closed in this church? Yeah. I mean, that's truth right there. That would be his goal. That would be his goal in that right there. Now look at verses number 2 and 3 as we move on. And Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven, and on the east side of Bethel, and spake unto them, saying, Go up and view the country. And the men went up and viewed Ai. And they returned to Joshua and said unto him, Let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up to smite Ai, and make not all the people to labor thither, for they are but a few. So here we see that Joshua sends men up to Ai to spy out the land, and they come back with a rather easy report. Now you got to remember, at this point in the story, Joshua and the children of Israel, they have no idea about Achan and his sin. They don't know. Joshua thinks all is well. Joshua thinks that everything, that him and God are on good terms, and that God and Israel are on good terms. He doesn't know. But you know what happens when a Christian or even a church becomes victorious? A little bit of arrogancy and pride start building up. You think about some of the leaders within our churches who've fallen. A lot of times you just kept on getting higher and higher and higher, and the higher up you go, the easier it is to fall. And the higher up that you fall, the harder you hit the ground when you do fall. And we've seen people that we've looked up to fall. They've made big mistakes, and they've and they've paid the price. Now, they're kind of arrogant in what they come back and say. Look at verse number 3. Verse number 3 of the text says, "And they returned to Joshua and said unto him, Let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and smite Ai. And make not all the people to labor thither, for they are but a few." They are but a few. They went up to Ai and they looked around and they said, "There's not really that many people. We don't even need to send all of our troops up. We'll just send only part of them up. And that won't be too bad of a thing." And then to make matters worse, you know what the spies' job was to do? Just to go spy out the land. But you know what they did? They gave unsolicited advice. And they told Joshua, "Hey, this is all you need to send." Now that wasn't their job. Their job was to go spy out the land and come back with a report, not come back with advice. You know, if there's one thing that we know and that we can all probably agree on, is that nobody likes unsolicited advice. Nobody likes someone to tell you, "Hey, you know, it would be a lot better if you did it like this." Or let me, you know, and especially advice that's not even true. Because guess what? Those few that they were talking about turned out to be 12,000 people. They were wrong. They were wrong about their report. They were wrong about what they saw. Now, I don't know if they got so complacent and they got so arrogant that they went over to the land and said, "Yeah, looks good to me. They only got a few." You know, when you don't do your digging, when you don't get good information, you come back with poor information. Before we start spouting off statistics and stats and all these things, we better make sure that we're right. We better make sure that we're right about things. That's why you won't hear me preaching on conspiracies. You know why? They're conspiracies. I mean, we don't really know if they're true or not.
Yeah.
You know, you hear some people talking about certain things like it's true. There's some things that we don't know. There are some things we're not supposed to know, and you know, but there are some things that we do know, and those things we ought to preach on and we ought to talk about. But the things that we don't know, why sit there and spend endless hours trying to argue them? You know, you talk to some people and they're so dogmatic at who killed Kennedy. Nobody knows. You weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
But if you talk to them and tell them any different, then you're a heretic. And it's like, why heretic? Like that's not even Kennedy. What in the world? I'm telling you, we know some crazy people out there. But there's a lot of arrogancy and there's pride. And they gave the unsolicited advice. And as I said, nobody likes the unsolicited advice. One of the things I used to hate all the time when I was a driver is that, you know, when I was a driver, I delivered oil. And delivered oil to dealerships and oil change places. And the one thing that those places have in common is they both have small parking lots, or at least parking lots that are hard to go through. And I have a big truck with a trailer, and you know, you have to be very strategic sometimes in how you park and how you do things. And I'd park and be pulling my hose inside to fill up an oil tank, and somebody come out and say, "You know, it'd be easier if you parked on the other side of the building." An idiot? I mean, like, the tank is right here. Like, I'm doing it the easiest way as I can. And it wasn't so much that they were trying to give me advice. It was really because they wanted it somewhere else. You know, they didn't want my truck parked there because it was too loud for them and stuff. I mean, I always said, "Look, man, you know, if you don't want me to park there, just say something. But don't tell me that it would be easier if I did it like, because if it would have been easier, I would have done it. I would have done it like that." But nobody likes the unsolicited advice. And we find that all over the place. And, you know, just be careful what you say. Now, another thing that we can learn from this, too, is that don't believe everything you hear. Don't believe everything you hear. Joshua believed exactly what they said. Maybe he should have questioned them a little bit more or found out a little bit more information. And not only should we not believe everything that you hear, also we should not take advice from everyone that gives it as well. Mm-hmm. You know, and again, sometimes it's really easy to believe things that agree with what we like. And just because it agrees with your liking doesn't mean it's true. It just means that, like, well, yeah, that leans, you know, that's probably true. No, you shouldn't say it's probably true and run with it. I mean, you should make sure that it's true before you start walking around factually stating things, because what you're doing is you're bearing false witness. And you start, you know, well, I read it on the internet. Well, then, excuse me, it must have been true then. I mean, you got to be careful. Just because you see a meme with somebody's face doesn't mean that that's actually what they said. You know, I love those ones of Abraham Lincoln that say just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. You know, and it's like, wait, he didn't say that. You know, but people think that. How did he say that? He didn't even. You know, they don't understand. there's an app called Meme Maker, and you can, I could get a meme of like Molly and have her say, I love monster trucks, and people think she likes monster trucks? No! But you know what? That's what happens when we just read stuff. I mean, make sure that you know, or do a little bit of digging before you go out and just talking about things. Isn't it funny how quickly they forgot that the battle that they just won at Jericho wasn't really because of them at all. I mean, they had weird instruction. I mean, they were to march around the city 7 times. I mean, that's not a battle plan that you would agree with if you didn't know the end of that story. I mean, imagine if that was, imagine if I said, hey, the only way we're going to grow the church is if we march around the church 7 times and don't say a word. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. I mean, really, people, you would think I'm an idiot. You would think that I'm nuts. But if I got divine revelation from God to do that, and we did it and it worked, guess what? We'd say, you know what? That wasn't me, that was him. Mm-hmm. That was him. Now they quickly forgot. They quickly forgot that the battle that they won at Jericho and the Jordan River that they crossed was not because of how great they were, it was because of how good and gracious that God was to them. So when they went over to Ai and they looked over there and said, oh yeah, we'll whip them in a heartbeat. They were counting their chickens before they hatched, and that's not the right thing to do. And by the way, if this church ever grows, and if we ever fill these pews, and if we see people saved on a weekly basis, it won't be because of any of us. It'll be because of Him and Him alone.
Amen.
And you can try method after method after method, and that's fine. And it's fine to use methods, and there's every generation is different, and you can't run a church like you did 30 years ago or 60 years ago. People are different now, and we're living in a day and age where people look at their phones all the time, and technology is a big thing, and order's not really a thing anymore. You could go back to the World War II era, and people were very structured in how they did things, and if they said they were going to be there, they were going to be there. It's amazing how many people tell you, I'll see you Sunday, and that's usually the mark of, well, I'll see you probably in 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know what it is about that. But anyway, look at verse number 4. Look at verse number 4 in the text. It says, so there went up hither of the people about 3,000 men. So Joshua heeds the advice of the spies. So there went up hither of the people about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai smote of them 36 men. For they chased from before the gate even unto Shebarim, and smote them in the going down. Wherefore the hearts of the people melted and became as water. So Israel goes up to Ai expecting an easy victory, and they get really surprised. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. You know what's so fun about watching upsets in sports is that usually the high and mighty teams are high and mighty. They're all boastful, and they're like, well, we were 32-0, and we're going to run right through the playoffs. And you see this little tiny team out of nowhere come and just beat them, and it's exciting. It's kind of cool to see that upset. When the U.S. Olympic team back in 1980 won the gold medal and beat Russia. That was a huge upset. Nobody thought in a million years that the USA would ever beat Russia. That wasn't the gold medal game, but they had to get through Russia to get to the gold medal game. People were laughing, saying, why should they even bother playing that game? And that's when the infamous, do you believe in miracles? Yes. That was it. Yeah. And boy, I tell you what, that was an upset. That was a David over a Goliath. But the Russian team was an arrogant team. They were full of themselves. Pride goeth before a fall, and a haughty spirit, or pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And sometimes it's fun to see that. But we as believers, we get caught up in that too. I've been going to church for 50 years. I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, I'm that, blah, 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 blah. You better be careful. Yeah. You better be careful how you talk about yourself. I've told the story many times of that man that got up to preach and just sat there and he talked about himself for 10 minutes, and after the people stood up and cheering for him. And he's doing this, telling them to keep on cheering. He's in prison today. Guess what? Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Yeah. And look, we can say, oh, shame on him. Well, we better be careful. We better be careful. That could happen to any, to any of us. Now notice that the people's hearts melted in this. And when they lost that battle, I mean, they were shocked as ever. And any time that you think that you're going to just run through something and win and just be so victorious and like, there's no way we're going to lose. There's no way it's going to work. I mean, we're so good and we're so powerful. And the hearts of the people melted. I mean, melted as water. They presumed the grace of God, and they lost. Now, we often talk about, how God can, melt the heart of stone for the lost sinner or for the person who's not right with God because, hey, they got a heart of stone. Well, guess what God can do? He can melt the heart of the prideful person too. That's what he did here. He melted their hearts, and how quickly God can humble a saint. So, look at verse number 7. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan to deliver us, to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Would to God that we had been content and dwelt on the other side of Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turneth their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall environ around us, and cut off our name from the earth. And what wilt thou do unto thy great name? So Joshua hears the news, and his heart turns to water as well. And he rents his clothes, and look, I mean, this, and again, Joshua at this point has no idea that he has lost, or why he has lost the battle to Ai. And here's Joshua, and he's ready to quit. I mean, he's ready to quit. This is Joshua. I mean, this is one of the heroes in the Bible, Joshua, ready to quit. Let me ask you this: have you ever been ready to quit? You ever been ready to walk out, resign? I'm never coming back. Some of you may have said that out the door. I'm never coming back here again. Well, here we are. We all probably said that at least one time. I ain't ever coming back. Never. Because you know what? Sometimes the defeats are hard. The defeats are hard. When you lose and when the flesh gets the best of you, boy, they're hard. Those are hard ones to come back from. Really hard. But he's ready to quit. And what a difference the chapter makes. I mean, because at the end of chapter number 6, the last verse says, So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was noised throughout all the country. Now, if the book of Joshua ended there, we'd say, wow, what a man Joshua was. Now we come to the next chapter, and we're like, oh my goodness, Joshua is not such a great man that we thought he was. Now, if the book of Joshua ended in chapter number 7, we'd say, man, he just wasn't all that great. Now it picks back up, and he does fine from there on out. But I tell you what, you've been ready to quit before? You've been in his shoes? Because it's amazing how quickly things can change. What a difference a day makes. What a difference a chapter makes. What a difference a week makes. I mean, even in our own country. Last week at this time, we were sitting there saying, oh yeah, the youth conference is coming up. Now this week it's like, I hope they'll let us do the youth conference. What a difference a week makes. Ain't that crazy? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how crazy it is. I mean, this is real stuff. This is real stuff. Now this is the same Joshua who was ready to take on the giants when he was one of the spies. When he went over into Canaan and he came back and the other 10 spies said, oh, there's no way we can go into Canaan. And Joshua and Caleb said, oh yeah, there is. It's not that big of a deal. We'll be able to take them down. He was so brave then. He's ready to take on the giants. He's ready to jump in. He's ready to serve God. He's fresh out of Bible school. I'm going to take on the world. And here he is after Ai saying, why did you even bring us over this Jordan? Why did you do this? This is the same Joshua that just crossed the Jordan on dry ground. I mean, do you remember how happy we were when we got the church paid off? Wow, that's an amazing thing. Lord paid off the church. Since then, we've had times we want to punch a hole in the wall. Why would you pay off? Why would you let us pay off the church and then just let us rot to pieces? Look, we may not have said that, but sometimes our attitude says that, doesn't it? This is the same Joshua who challenged the angel of the Lord in chapter number 5 when he saw the angel of the Lord standing there. Same Joshua that just defeated Jericho here he is with his face in the dirt, and he's moaning and he's groaning. He's worried about what the people of the other lands are going to say. Lord, they're going to think that we're idiots. They're going to think that we can't fight. They're going to think that we're going to run away. You know what he sounds like? He sounds like the children of Israel complaining to Moses in the wilderness, doesn't he? Remember what they said in the wilderness? Why would you bring us over here out of Egypt and let us die in the wilderness? It's an ungrateful thing to say, isn't it? It's a horrible thing to say. And now here's Joshua kind of doing the same thing. Sounding just like the children of Israel. Why would you bring us over here? Why would you let us cross this Jordan? Just so we'll come over here and die. Just so we'll come over here and lose. I mean, he literally said in that prayer to God, we'd be content to stay on the other side of Jordan. If I'd have known this was going to happen, we just stayed over there. I would have stayed over there. And again, let me remind you, Joshua. This is Joshua, one of the Bible heroes. One of our heroes in the Bible, Joshua. Now the application that I want to draw here is that any man that God ever used, any woman that God ever used in the Bible, had feet of clay. They had feet of clay. And let me remind you that any man or woman that God uses today still has feet of clay. Now, it is kind of nice to know that, you know what? God still used Joshua in spite of how stupid Joshua was. Someone made the quote that God decided to use, God factored in your stupidity before he decided to use you. Isn't that good? I mean, think about that. God factored in every stupid thing that I would ever do before he called me. Well, that's a gracious God right there. That's a God that's full of mercy. I mean, that's a gracious God. Factoring in all that. God uses men who mess up. He uses women who mess up. He uses people who have feet of clay. All that stuff that we talked about David, how David and Bathsheba covering up his sin. Guess what? God still used David even after that. David's life was different from there on out, and I mean, it wasn't an easy life on him, but the Lord still used him in a mighty, mighty way after that. Glad that God still takes people and uses them after they've fallen into sin. Some people think that just because you fall into sin or just because you're going through a trial, God will never use me. No, God uses all sorts of people. Uses all sorts of people. We saw a couple weeks ago he used a man in a wheelchair. And look how much he uses them too. And that man at one point was ready to walk away and quit too. And you'd be mad too if you got paralyzed. Yeah. Spending, a couple years in a nursing home. And it turns out that his greatest liability is his greatest asset. Amazing who God decides to use and who he doesn't use. Now, we'll wrap this up here in a couple minutes, but over the last couple weeks, when we preached on the children of Israel crossing Jordan, I kind of likened that unto the church. And how, there was a time that we didn't know if we were going to keep the doors open. I mean, really. We had people looking at the books and looking at how many people we had and saying, we can't do this. We had someone say, there's no way humanly possible that you'll ever be able to pay the bills and with this amount of people. Well, guess what? We somehow paid the bills and then we got the church paid off. Now, we're not rolling in money, and as I said this morning, we put the nonprofit in nonprofit. But you know what? Having the church paid off, that was our crossing Jordan. That was our, and not only did we cross Jordan, we crossed it on dry ground. And I'm not saying that in a braggadocious type way. I'm saying that in a sense that God had so much mercy on us and so much grace on us because the problems that we had were our own fault. It wasn't like the city of West End came in and just said, hey, you guys owe $10 million. It was because of bad, poor decisions that we had made over the years and over the years and over the years. And you know what God said? I'm willing to just let it go. I'm willing to fix it. And that's what he did. That was our version of crossing Jordan. That was us crossing Jordan on dry land. And just to be even talking to people and telling them that. And there's some people that knew our history and knew some of the bills that we had and some of the problems that we had. You guys got the church paid off? What, did someone just give a ton of money? No. In fact, we lost more people than we got it paid off. That's the mighty hand of God doing a mighty work. Now every time I get frustrated, and every time I want to punch a hole in the wall, sometimes I say, Lord, why did you put me here? And why did you put me in this mess? And then I think, just right there, Lord, Why would you bring me over this Jordan just to let us die, just to let us rot? And I got to realize that, you know what, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. I'm the one who needs to get right.
Yeah.
Now I say that collectively as a church, but let me say this from an individual standpoint. If the Lord has saved you and restored you, and maybe you have a personal story of how God just did something in your life, where you crossed that Jordan on dry ground, where you crossed that Red Sea, where you've got that story. Now, I know when you got on the other side, after God did a marvelous work, there was times of frustration. There was times that you said, Lord, why did you do this for me if you're just going to let this happen? Well, oftentimes, and here's Joshua all upset about this, but he didn't know the whole story. All he knew was that they lost at the Battle of Ai. He didn't know about the sin that was going on. And sometimes in our frustration, we don't know the whole story either. And we don't know what God's trying to do, what he's not trying to do. I can't get into too much detail, but I found out some news the other day, and I thought, boy, am I glad that I didn't get what I was asking for. That was just about a year ago. I was praying for something, and it didn't happen. And I thought, why wouldn't God let that happen? Well, now I know why. Now I know why, and I'm glad he didn't. I'm glad he didn't. Isn't that a crazy thing?
Yeah.
Sometimes we have that attitude of Joshua. But if you've been saved, if you've been restored, if you've crossed that Jordan River on dry ground, it wasn't so that God would just bring you across so you could sit there and rot to death. He's got a plan for you. He's got something in our lives for us. Don't get discouraged. Press on. As I said this morning, press on. JB, come up here and we'll sing page number 546.